You happy with what it says? It worked out for what you want to do in regards to the reserves competition?
Yeah, it's a great outcome really for us. It's taken a lot of work to get to this phase where we're going to have our own team in the competition, but I think it's going to be great for the competition. The comp always needs to be looked at to revitalise, and I think this is a good opportunity. I think it'll be good for the WAFL, but I also think it'll be good for our young players to play in their own team as well and play together. I don't think for them it will change too much from what they experienced at East Perth, other than they'll be playing for the West Coast Eagles rather than the East Perth Football Club, where I think the players learnt a lot about our system before they played, and that's obviously the idea of having your own team, is so that they know the systems, they know the game plan and strategies and so forth, and when they come into the team they can adapt really quickly.
Coach?
The coach? Oh, we don't know yet. Obviously we only got the licence last night, so we'll start to look through that now.
How far down the track are you in terms of player rules for top-ups and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that'll take about 3 weeks, Mark. I think it'll be 3 or maybe 3 weeks we'll have that finalised. There's a lot of work to do on that because there's probably 9 or 10 different scenarios of where we'll get our players from, and it obviously means that we need to be restricted in a lot of areas where we don't impact the current club situation. So we'll have to work through that. But Brady Rawlings and Craig Vozzo and a group from the WAFL and the Football Commission will get together and start to work through that.
Do you have any early thoughts on that as to like some ideas you would have in terms of where you might source them?
We do. We think generally we're going to be looking at players for position rather than just outright talent, because it'll depend on what we've got drafted in and what we've got on our list and who we think's going to play. So we might end up having to draft a centre or find a centre forward or a centre half back or a ruckman or whatever to fit the roles that we need to play in the comp. And that's also challenging, because if you just went after talent, it'd be a little easier than looking at all the positional moves that you have to make.
What does the team look like? What name will they play under? What will the jumper look like? And where do they play home games?
Well, all that's to be worked out, but we'll probably play in our alternate strip, or we'll play in our Indigenous Guernsey, which I think would be a great fit for what we're trying to achieve. But again, we'll have to work that out. The games we'll get some home games, but that'll have to be negotiated as well. And there'll be most of our games will be away from home. And remembering, of course, there's only the senior team playing, but hopefully there's a gap to be filled there, maybe with some women's football before our games and things like that. So hopefully there's some opportunities that'll open up.
Will your top-ups train with the club, or will they be separated? Say if you go and get, say scenario, you go and get 8 really good reserves players who probably aren't good enough to play WAFL footy but have got some talent, do they train with your Eagles senior squad? Where do they fit in?
I've got no idea, Tim. We really haven't gone through all the scenarios of where they'd train, what times they'd train, and how it's going to fit together. This is the first time, obviously, we've had to do this, so it's going to be a little tricky for our guys to sort through that. But there are models in Melbourne that work really well. I think Geelong's is pretty good. I think Box Hill's obviously pretty good with what Hawthorn have been doing for years. So there's a number of things that we can learn out of those clubs.
Is just saying, if you did get to play home games, would Lathlane be your preference? That's where you want to play those home games?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because we'll have our premises there, we want the players to experience at least playing at home and developing them to make sure that they understand, they're there to be competitive and win. They're not just there to make up numbers. And we've seen with the scenario in South Australia this year, it didn't work very well, where the teams got belted on a regular basis. I mean, that's not good for anyone. We need to maintain the integrity of the WAFL competition, and we want to be competitive every week and win games of footy. Now, that's going to take a lot of doing, because a lot of our players will be very young, but in saying that, they'll be very talented as well.
there is a bit of crossover in some of the guys at East Perth, like McGinnity and Wellingham and those guys. I'm assuming it'd be hands off those guys as far as you guys are concerned for your team, or hasn't been worked out?
No, it would be hands off those guys, but there might be some players, for example, coming off the list this year, or potentially some players who've played with us in the past that maybe aren't even playing, that we might be able to utilise to make comebacks and come and help our young players. So we're going to work through all those sort of scenarios to find out what we can do.
Would the other clubs encourage you to sort of discover talent, if you like, as well, like people that they haven't come across that aren't on their lists, that you may be able to access and showcase and maybe eventually pass them on to a WAFL club?
I'm sure they'd love to steal them off us if we can find some. You know, that's the idea, I think. I think if we can actually expose some more talent to the competition, that's what we're about. If we can do that, I think it helps everyone. And then if they're from a zone that a WAFL club has, and they can convince the player to keep playing WAFL with them in the future, that's fine with us as well.
You're talking about like a guy like Drew Petrie. Has he said he'd be interested in playing?
I haven't asked him, but I mean, he's the sort of guy where you could talk about and think, well, could Drew help us for 12 months and just fill in from time to time if we're short on a tall? And I think Brady Rawlings might have to sort through that sort of list management to find out who we've got available and how we can get them to play.
What's the size of your top-up squad?
It's probably going to be up to about 15. We will have a squad this year of 47, which includes 2 Cat B players, which includes 2 basketball guys that we've got in, and we'll have to train them up. But at least with our situation now, we'll be able to play them, because at East Perth we always had 3 or 4 players playing in the reserves, but now we'll be able to play them in the senior team and give them a run and see very quickly whether they're going to measure up to the standard.
So there won't be a cap on how many guys you can put on the park, like how many AFL listed guys you can put on the park?
No, there won't be. Yeah.
Do you feel like the Eagles brand, or the Eagles playing in a WAFL competition, will draw people through the gates, do you think?
I hope so. I hope it draws a lot of people, and I hope our members get on board and come along to watch us play South Fremantle at Fremantle Oval, and we get a big crowd there, so that, one, they can have a look at some of the aspiring young players to get into our senior team, but they can also look at the standard of the WAFL competition, which I think is extremely strong, and more people getting along to the footy is only going to help, and it helps the commercial side of each of the clubs, but certainly it'll help expose our kids to more and more people watching.
Where do your top-up players go when they're not playing for you? Because obviously what we're seeing with both Peel and East Perth, it gets quite volatile in terms of player availability once the AFL season's up and running.
Well, I assume they'll go back and play, and this is an assumption, I assume they'll go back and play with their original club. And that might even mean if there's a country player in our top-up list, they'd go back and play with their country team. If there's an amateur player, they'd go back and play with their amateur club. The difference, I think, with what I've seen with the amateur football is that the amateur clubs are really used to that sort of system. Guys drop in and out of the thing. Guys go on holidays, mid-season and miss 3 weeks, which drives the coach of the amateur side nuts. But I mean, that's what happens, and they're probably more used to that sort of system. So I guess we'd get away with that, and the players would understand as top-up players that'll happen from time to time.
The other side of this is East Perth. How confident are you that they'll put a competitive team on the deck in 2019?
Well, I assume they started the day they told us they weren't going to be we weren't going to be in the partnership. So I assume they're well down the track to replacing all of their guys. I don't know, because I haven't spoken to Dean about that, but my assumption was that they were well and truly underway trying to get players in, and certainly that's what they should have been doing, and hopefully they'll have a pretty competitive team, because I assume also that the AFL, the WA Footy Commission are allowing them to go and recruit, and they need to. They need to get some senior players in.
Trev, while we've got you, do you have any thoughts on the rule changes that have just come out?
Look, call me old-fashioned, but I'm not a great fan of all these changes. And I might be one out even with some of our guys, but certainly I'm not a great fan. I think, and again, I might be biased, I think we saw a pretty good grand final this year, and I am biased, we won. But, I mean, in the end, we had a pretty good game of footy that showcased everything which is great about the game. It just didn't have attack, it had defence, it had competitiveness, it had the thrills and spills and the stuff that we love about our game. So I'm not sure we needed to temper with it as much as we have, but again, that's why we have an AFL commission in place. They make the rules and then we have to adapt to them, and that's what they're put there for.
Is there any one of them that you particularly like in isolation or particularly don't like in isolation?
I'm not sure about the mandate on starting positions. I think there's some understanding that might free up the scoring and those sort of things, and it may do that. But the game's just not all about scoring. The game's about competitiveness and defensive work, and I just think the game's evolved over so many years with different things that we haven't liked, and coaches adapt, and no one liked flooding. But coaches have been able to get around that. They've been able to adapt, and I think that's what makes a good coach. They adapt as the other coaches go into combat with them. So, yeah, I might again, I'll repeat, I might be a bit old-fashioned, but I like the rules the way they are, and I'm surprised there's so many changes.
That's interesting, because if you look at the rules and the purpose of the rules, a team like West Coast would probably adapt reasonably well to most of those changes. Would you agree with that? Like, you're taking a whole of game view rather than a what suits the club view?
Yeah, look, we do some of the stuff that they're implementing or saying you have to do now. So we do parts of those things now, Mark, so you're right. I'm just looking at the game in total rather than just West Coast. If I just looked at us, I could probably cherry pick the things that we like and cherry pick the things we don't like. But in the end, that'll be up to Simo. I mean, he'll be onto that already, so he'll be straight to work.
Can I ask you about contracts in regards to the go home scenario? There's so much of it going on. Now we've heard today that Dane Beams apparently wants to go back to Melbourne now. It's the report, still got 2 years to run. Got Tim Kelly keen to back to WA, in particular to your club. Jesse Hogan, vice versa, all that sort of stuff going on. How hard is it to contract someone? And how are football clubs being branded as the tough guy here if they don't allow a go home factor?
The go home factor is a myth, in my view. I think there's some genuine cases. Tim Kelly's got a genuine case. I think there's probably others who've got genuine cases that I probably don't know about. But I think this homesickness stuff is rubbish. I mean, young players out of home, and they need to adapt. I mean, if you're in the workforce and you have to move states for work, people do it on a regular basis, and they adapt to their state. They may not like it as much as they like being home, but to say it's just a go-home factor for homesickness, I think is rubbish. I think there are genuine cases, and I think some players really should get that opportunity. But in general terms, most players are going to shift clubs for other reasons other than just homesickness, and I think that's an overused reason why players want to move.
So can you give me why is Tim Kelly different then?
Well, Tim Kelly has a reason around family and family support, which is critical, and I don't want to get into Tim's personal reasons, but certainly he has a specific need, and that's something that he's working on. So I think he has a fair case, and I know Geelong are very supportive of that. but they also understand that they have a really good footballer, and he likes playing in Geelong. He's always said that. But the family is a different situation. So I think for him, he has to make he's made up his mind that's what he wants to do, so that he can have the family support around him.
Is the Beams one a bit of a red flag moment though? That the 2 years out, traded home for compassionate grounds originally, and now wants to go back, and it's almost like Brisbane are almost expected to do the trade because he went there because his father was dying.
Look,
I know these are difficult circumstances, but it's almost like a contract is now, the value of a contract is now severely diluted in the AFL.
Yeah, I think that's been happening for a while, Mark. I don't think it's new. I think the contract is only as good as the two-party agreement, so that everyone's involved, and clubs do it just as much as players. You know, they'll trade a player out and he's got a contract, and so we can't all put our hand up and say it's the player's fault. You know, clubs have been doing it for a while as well, and as much as it hurts at times when a player puts his hand up and says, I'm on contract but I want to leave, you still have to sit down with him and reason with him as to why, what's else is behind it. If it's purely about the lure of more money and not opportunity, or not for compassionate or other reasons, I think clubs have every right to say, well, no, you're not going. And to answer your question, Tim, some clubs have seen as being a bit nasty that way. Now, we've had that situation ourselves. We did it with Mitch Brown a couple of years ago when he wanted to go to St Kilda, and Mitch had his best year, the year he stayed. He was outstanding for us, and he's an outstanding person. But I think all clubs would do it if they didn't think a player was going to get a game, or they thought he had a real need to leave and he was still on contract. But there are times when clubs and or players will put their foot down.
Trev, in regards to Kelly, how advanced are the discussions between the two clubs, or can you give us an update on those discussions?
Yeah, I don't really know. I'm out of the loop a bit on where Brady is with the list management side of things, but he and Stephen Wells have been in constant contact on a regular basis, so I assume that they're either making progress or it's at a bit of a stalemate, because we can't satisfy Geelong at the moment, as I understood yesterday.
A replacement for Sam Mitchell, any closer?
Not yet. It won't be far off though, because Craig Vozzo's been doing a lot of work there.
Just with Tim Kelly, so as it stands, you sort of feel like it's a stalemate, it's unlikely to get done this year?
I don't know. That's how it was yesterday. Geelong had rejected our offer, so there's a bit of work to be done yet.